Okay, so we're going to be over in Acts chapter 5. So I had mentioned to everybody on last Sunday that prayers that for Art and that legal things would clear up and all that would work out, and the prayers have made all the difference. So this week, just legal just all cleared itself up and everything went smoothly, and so life is very, very good. So thank you everybody for all the prayers. It's been a good week. Okay, so in Acts chapter 5, we're just quickly to kind of refresh ourselves. We're covering the first 12 chapters of Acts this quarter. Next semester, we will cover the second half. And so here you might think of the first half of Acts as the early church, the second half as Paul's journeys, because the first half here, the central figure is Peter, and most everything is focused on the initial preaching to the Jews, and everything is based out of Jerusalem. When you get to the second half of the book, Paul becomes the central figure. He's the one you follow around. He's primarily preaching to Gentiles, and everything is based primarily out of Antioch. So we're here in chapter 5, so we're in this first part. Peter is going to be kind of the central spotlights on him. We'll look at other people and other events, but quite a lot of it centers around Peter's preaching. As you go chapter by chapter at this point, chapter 1, we looked at the ascension of Jesus, the choosing of a 12th to replace Judas. That was the central focus of chapter 1. Chapter 2, you get Peter's first sermon. Now, the other guys we're talking to, but we focus on Peter and what he said there on Pentecost and the beginning of the church there on the day of Pentecost when 3,000 are added. Chapter 3 looks at Peter's second recorded sermon, and the events surrounding the lame man there with Peter and John at the temple gate called Beautiful. Chapter 4, you look at the arrest of Peter and John. And then chapter 5, we are going to look at the first public sin of the church, and then of the apostles arrested. So there's more prison work, and then we also have this incident that we've not seen up to this point, which is dealing with sin within the church. Now, I say the first public sin because I'm going to say with some great deal of confidence that I don't think this is the first person to sin in the church since the day of Pentecost. I'm pretty sure there were some other sins committed. But the difference is that Ananias and Sapphira are going to commit a sin that is a public and what the Old Testament would call a presumptuous sin, meaning they knew what they were doing. It was an intentional decision, and they're going to flaunt it in a public way before the church. And that's not something that has been dealt with up to this point. Up to this point, everything we found about those who are coming to Christ has been a very positive thing. They're obeying the gospel. They're showing love to one another. There's confidence in their fellowship and service to the Lord. There's unity. Everything has been, up to this point, very good. But at the end of chapter 4, you are introduced to Barnabas, who that's really his nickname. He's a Levite of Cyprian birth. So you go to Acts chapter 4, verse 36, and his name is Joseph. And so he's a Levite of Cyprian birth, meaning he is a Jew. He's from the general area that they are at. He's not from some far-flung area like Rome. And he gets this nickname of Barnabas, meaning son of encouragement or son of exhortation. And he owns some land. He sells the land and then lays that money at the apostles' feet. So he's making a fairly grand gesture of financial aid to the Christians at the time. And you think about it, here it is, he gets this nickname out of the deal, right? He's known as this really impressive individual And Barnabas will go on to do a great many more encouraging things. But if you cut the chapter markers out, which sometimes we ought to do in order to keep our minds in the flow of the text, that's the end of chapter 4, and then we flow right into Ananias and Sapphira, and they sell a piece of property, but then they're going to sell it for a certain price, keep part of the price, and then lay part of the price at the apostles' feet. And so that in and of itself is not a bad thing. I mean, you imagine if somebody had a $100,000 piece of property, they sold it, and they said, well, I'm going to keep $50,000, but I'm going to give $50,000 to the church. That would be impressive. Like, nobody would think of that as a bad thing. But if you sell it for $100,000, you say you sold it for $50,000, and then tell everybody you gave all the money, now we have a different problem, right? So the issue is not the giving per se, but the giving for the purpose of being seen in a certain light, right? The reason that this is done is so that they will be seen in a similar light to Barnabas, as people who gave all instead of giving a portion. And so there is an issue there of character that has to be dealt with. So we're going to be, as we go through chapter 5, we're going to break it into roughly 3 chunks. The first chunk we'll look at is chapter 5, verse 1 through 11, which is the events surrounding the sin of Ananias and Sapphira. Then we'll look in verse 12 through 32 and through verse 33 through 42 as the third chunk. So first chunk, looking at Ananias and Sapphira. One of the things I want you to see right off the bat is if you look at the events, Ananias is going to be confronted by Peter. But as you look at the confrontation that comes up, verse 3, it says, Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit? And then verse 4, he'll say, why is it that you have conceived this deed in your heart? And then if you go down to verse 9, when Sapphira is confronted separately, Peter said to her, why is it that you have agreed together to put the Spirit of the Lord to the test? There are 3 people or beings that are blamed for this sin. All right, we have Satan, who has filled their heart. You have Ananias, who has conceived it in his heart. And you have Sapphira, who has partnered. And so my question to you is, whose sin is this? And whose fault is this? And how can it be all of their fault, right? Who's to blame here? Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so they are definitely blamed, right? Ananias receives blame, Sapphira receives blame, but Satan also receives blame. How is Satan at fault in this? Maybe that's a better way to put it. Right? Okay, so Satan's piece in this is he's, as the scriptures say, he's roaming around like a roaring lion, seeking who he can devour. He's looking for just what a lion looks for, weakness, right? He's looking for weakness, and the weakness he finds here is what? Yeah, greed. Yeah, a desire for the esteem of men, right? It's very similar to how Jesus talked about the Pharisees, and they walk around with the long robes and the phylacteries on their head, and they pray on the street corners so they can be seen by men, right? Nothing wrong with praying, but when the praying is done to be seen, there's a problem. And when you combine that greed with that desire for esteem, that's where you get, how do we have both, right? How do we keep some of this money, but also get the honor? Any other character flaws or weaknesses that we see here in Ananias and Sapphira? Selfishness. Yeah, they're thinking about themselves first. Yeah, that big, broad umbrella that is selfishness, right? Yeah. You notice that. Thank you. It makes me happy. Yeah, I have I right in the middle of sin. Yeah, it is. It's about them. When you look at Sapphira, there seems to be a little bit of a difference between Ananias and Sapphira in the way that they are confronted. One, they're confronted separately, which is powerful because she is not automatically lumped into the sin of her husband. Right? So Ananias sins, and he doesn't come clean. Sapphira has her own opportunity. I find that really powerful because oftentimes we think if I just go along with a certain crowd that's the right kind of crowd, then I'll be okay. Or if I am with the wrong crowd, then I'll be in trouble. But at the end of the day, you are responsible for you, right? If you hang out with a lot of really good people, but you yourself never work on your own character, it's not going to help, right? And on the other hand, if you are married to somebody who is not being faithful to God, you have the opportunity to being faithful yourself, even though they're not faithful. Can anybody think of an example in the Bible of a wife that was not pulling Sapphira's mode of doing the same thing? Yeah. Abigail, yeah. So Nabal, his name means worthless, right? And she's married to a worthless man, but Abigail is not worthless, right? And so she steps in and is recorded as being deeply faithful, even though her husband was not. Yeah. Right. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, when you look at verse 9, you have agreed together to put the Spirit of the Lord to the test. What test had they put the Holy Spirit to? How have they tested the Holy Spirit's? Yeah, so they did do some good. Yeah. No, I think so. I think that that's probably how they rationalized it, right? We rationalize the things that we do wrong. We say, oh, well, but and I could even argue the point, right? Let's say it's a $100,000 piece of property. They gave $50,000. When was the last time any of you cut a $50,000 check to the church? Right? I mean, that's impressive. But there's lying in there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. And again, they had a choice in it, right? This is an entirely voluntary process. Are you going to give it to God or not? And it's I'm going to kind of. God's not big in the kind ofs. Yeah, that's a good point. When Peter says to Sapphira, you put the Spirit of the Lord to the test, I think the test here is, will God find out when you lie? Will God find out when you do the wrong thing? Right? So it's like the kid who tests lying with the parents, right? Will they catch me? Will they know? And the answer is yes, always, right? That's what you want your kids to believe, is that they will always be caught. If you go back to verse 3, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit? The emphasis throughout this is not the lying to Peter, right? And in fact, if you continue on down in the end of verse 4, Peter will say, "You've not lied to men, but to God." Is that technically true? Did Ananias lie to a man? He did. He lied to Peter, right? But it's very similar to John 12:44. So in John chapter 12, verse 44, Jesus would say that he who believes in me does not believe in me, but believes in the one who sent me. Which is a weird statement when you think about it. He who believes in me does not believe in me, but in the one who sent me. How can you believe in me and not believe in me? The grammatical structure there is you're leaving out the word only. He who believes in me does not only believe in me, but also in the one who sent me. The emphasis here is, yeah, you lied to Peter, but you didn't only lie to Peter, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, and that is Peter. That when he was confronted by Nathan, that was his response to all the sin with Bathsheba and Uriah and all of that. That was his response: "Is you only have I sinned." And you're right. He had sinned against other individuals, namely Uriah, who's dead, at his hand. But it all stemmed from him sinning against God. All of the rest is just an outgrowth of that. Once you have decided to lie to God, you're going to end up lying to men too, right? Once you've decided that you are going to be deceitful and manipulative with your Creator, all the other things are a natural outflowing of it. In the same way that when the Israelites asked for a king, and Samuel was really upset about it, and God told him, he said, they haven't rejected you, they've rejected me, right? The problem isn't with Peter, it's with God. Anybody have any other thoughts or anything there? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think she was not aware of it, and in fact, Peter will say at the end of verse 9, "Behold, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they'll carry you out as well." That seems to imply she didn't know anything about those events. So, yeah, I think you're right. With her, it seemed that the partnering that she did was not so much conceiving the idea. That's what she knew what he'd done, and she was keeping in agreement with the secret. And as Perry said, she had her chance, right? She had her chance to come clean on it, and it is an interesting kind of reminder of how much God cares about you coming clean, right? If you do the wrong thing, what's the first thing you got to do? You got to confess, right? You got to own it, and until you own it, nothing else is going to work out. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. And Paul will talk about that idea of why do you do things with the Corinthians when he says there's godly sorrow and then there's worldly sorrow, right? Worldly sorrow is the guy who got caught robbing a bank, and he's sad. He's sad he got caught. He's like, man, I almost made it out with that 50 mil, and I'm sad I got caught. Well, he's sad, but it's a worldly sorrow. Godly sorrow, he says, leads to repentance. And that's what we're looking for in Sapphira, we're looking for it in Ananias as well, is, look, aside from the consequences, if even if you could get away with it, do you want to be a better person? Do you want to be right with God? Because you know that lying is wrong, you know that what you've done is wrong, and you're being confronted on it. I mean, you're being asked a very pointed question. In both cases, they're given that opportunity to own it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting thing because, yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. You go to the garden, you have Satan, you have Eve, you have Adam, right? So you got three figures involved in that original decision, that original sin. Ananias and Sapphira, you got three figures again. Satan being brought up as tempting them, and then Ananias and Sapphira, making the choices. Yeah, that's a really good point. Any other comments? Okay. So, when we talk about the church today, a lot of the things that we've already discussed come into play, right? That we may not be an Ananias and Sapphira situation, which, by the way, added little detail about Ananias, his name means one favored by God. I think there's an interesting little tidbit there. Who gave him the tract of land in the first place? Right? He's a man who has been favored by God financially to have the means by which he could make that sort of a lavish gift. Where did he get it from? He got it from God. One favored by God. And the temptation can be, I think, that in the church, you can care more about looking a certain way than being a certain way, right? If you had to go back and say, Ananias and Sapphira, you have two choices. You can either do what you did, or you could keep the land and just keep the money to yourself. Now, I know there's a third option there, which is they sell the land and give all of it. But Peter says they didn't have to do that part. So we're going to just take that one off the table. You can give part of it and lie like you did, or just keep the whole thing. The irony is it would have been better for them to just keep the whole thing. Right? Just keep it, don't sell it. Let Barnabas be Barnabas, you be you. You go, what? Look, I'm so grateful other people are doing that, but I'm not at that place where I can do that as a cheerful giver, so I'm just not going to do it. You'd be better off to do that than what they did. But when you care more about how you look to everybody, you tend to make some bad decisions to cover up sin. And I think one of the pieces of Ananias and Sapphira that we don't often think about as often is the fact that these are two people whose behavior is being dictated by what others think of them more than by what is right. And though you may not be in the situation of selling a portion of land and lying about that, are there ever times in your life where what other people might think about you change the way you behave amongst God's people? And I think for most of us, there probably are. Right? There's a buddy of mine, he likes to call it church face. Right? You come in on Sunday and you got church face. And I got to look a certain way, and you put on certain clothes, and you try and have a certain demeanor about you that everything is good. But what if everything isn't good? Like, what if you've been caught throughout the week in a mire of sins and poor decisions and problems, and you come in on Sunday and you go, oh, it's fine. I'm not sure you're doing the right thing. Right? I think there is a time where if we're not honest with each other and we're not actually using the family the way we ought to, that what we're doing is no different than what Ananias and Sapphira did. So I think there are circumstances in which we can put on a certain look to be seen a certain way, and if we're not careful, you end up exactly where Ananias and Sapphira were. Anybody have any thoughts or comments on that? Okay, so then let's move down to verse 12. So Ananias and Sapphira, they both die. Then I guess I should add there, verse 11, great fear came over the whole church and over all who heard of these things. An interesting aspect, this punishment that comes from God, which is pretty heavy. I mean, you're not going to find a much stricter punishment than, immediate death. The impact upon the church was, was fear, and I think that's a healthy thing, because the next pieces that we see is the church growing. It's not a bad thing for the church to fear God. it's not a bad thing for us to realize, oh, he's watching everything we're doing. He does absolutely know what's going on, and how I behave as a child of his matters. I'm not going to be able to live one life 6 days out of the week and then another one on the 7th. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. It is a blessing you get. This was obviously done as a sign for the rest of the church, right? Not only the people of that time, but us as well. We get to go, oh, this is why this is a big deal. But the reality is that God isn't going to zap you the first time you do the wrong thing, and so you have time, and it's a blessing that we have that time to repent, to change, to grow. So yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. No, and you're right. This is the beginning of something in the same way that when God first instituted the Sabbath in the Old Testament, guy goes out. I mean, the guy's just picking up sticks. He's not like starting a concrete plant. He's just picking up sticks for firewood, but it is breaking the Sabbath. And so God has a swift and clear punishment that visibly shows everybody this is how seriously you should take it. Ahab and Abihu, same thing. Other examples like Uzzah, where at the beginning of a thing, when something is happening, God makes it clear. And I think that's exactly what's going on here as well. You have this is why I say it's the first public sin, right? It's the first time we've run into this in the church where somebody's trying to manipulate the system to make themselves look better, and God, with very swift kind of guillotine justice, makes it clear this is an unacceptable behavior so that all the generations to come will know that, right? They're not all going to have the punishment that swiftly, but you can know how God feels about it clearly from the beginning. So, yeah, absolutely. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so then verse 12, 12 through 32 is another section. Now, I have in here, just as an aside, and I put it in there because I don't want to forget about it, because sometimes as we go through things, there's details I want to make sure I put in. But down in verse 29 and 30, in this conversation that Peter and the apostles will have with the high priest and the Sadducees who have arrested them and the council, Peter and the apostles answered, "We must obey God rather than men. The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom you put to death by hanging him on a..." Now, I'm reading out of, I think, New American Standard. It says hanging him on a cross. If you have a King James Version, it probably says tree. The word there is wood. And so in like the New American Standard, they're saying, we know what type of lumber it was. It was a cross, so they translate a cross. It's not a bad translation. But technically speaking, it's more generic term. It's lumber or wood. And one of the reasons I mention that is there's a cool Old Testament connection there. It's both in Acts 5 and in Galatians 3, this idea is mentioned of somebody who hangs on a tree. Back in the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy 21, it's laid out, if a man's committed a sin deserving of death and he's put to death and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain overnight on the tree, but you shall surely bury him that day, so you do not defile the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, for he was hanged as accursed of God. There's this weird little law thrown in Deuteronomy 21 about somebody being hung on a tree, and that means that that person is cursed by God. And then Peter in Acts, and then Paul in Galatians mentions, yeah, that Old Testament thing where it talks about one who's hung on a tree is cursed by God, that also applied to Jesus. When Jesus hung on a tree, he was cursed by God, not in his case for his own sins, but he bore the curse of our sins. So it's an added little detail and a reference back to Old Testament things that I find to be powerful, and I didn't want to forget it, so I threw the slide in so I wouldn't forget, because that's what I do. Okay, so here in verse 12 through 32, the apostles are out preaching. Verse 12 tells us that the people are with one accord in Solomon's portico. We've talked about that location, kind of that outer porch area or breezeways in the outer temple area that could fit thousands of people. And it talks about the way that the church is viewed at this time period. And so you get these little anecdotes through the first beginning chapters of how the church is viewed. And it says, none of the rest dared to associate with them. However, the people held them in high esteem. I have here on the handout, what impression did the church leave on the rest of Jerusalem, and what behavior led to that reputation? So the short version, what impression do they leave? They're held in high esteem. My question to you is why? People aren't willing to join themselves to him, but they're held in high esteem by the majority of people. So much so that we're going to deal with things like jealousy from the leadership. What is going on that is leaving that kind of an impression? High esteem, but we don't want to join you. Yeah, so I think you're probably right. I think some of the events that have just preceded have had an effect on that. One, you would hold the people in high esteem for one reason, because they've shown a moral code that's serious, right? It's serious enough that they would be willing to put two of their own to death over it. So that's one. The signs and wonders would be another factor, right? I mean, that certainly would cause people esteem. We'll see in the verses that continue, people are bringing them to have miracles performed, and it's not necessarily just Christians bringing their loved ones, but others too. Yeah. Good for you, buddy. I'll be over here. Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. You've got this high esteem because of what they're seeing them doing and saying, but the consequences of following are obvious too, because they can tell the political turmoil and whatnot that the high priests, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, all of them have. I mean, they don't want them to be caught up in those sorts of punishments. Yeah. I think they're also seeing that unity that it talks about. They were all with one accord in Solomon's portico, right? There is something impressive when you see, in this case, thousands of people, and they're gathered together, and they are studying and devoted to Scripture, and they're singing, and they're worshiping God, and they're doing this. This is not a Sunday-only thing at this point, by the way. This is like an everyday thing, right? It's day by day they're in Solomon's porch. So there's an added element of, wow, look at the quality of these people. I mean, it's hard not to be impressed by people with a high moral standard, and they're unified, and they're a grateful people. Yeah, that's a great point. All of these events that we've seen where Barnabas and Ananias Sapphira, kind of, right? But people are bringing money and they're laying it at the apostles' feet and they're making sure that all of the different Christians are taken care of. That is not normal and in a very wonderful, heartwarming sort of way. And people would have seen that and been impressed by the quality of the church. A lot of the people who are a part of the church at this point don't live in Jerusalem, right? They came in for Pentecost and they've stayed. And in order for that to happen, it's required a Herculean effort on the part of God's people to make that happen. So there is just a general philanthropic wonder about it. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. It we're not gonna. The Jewish leaders are telling us no. I mean, they killed him. So. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So all of those things, I think, are right. I think that all of those play in to the things that are going on here. So, as people from all the different areas, they're bringing in the sick, they're bringing in the afflicted. Verse 17, the high priest is going to rise up, and the sect of the Sadducees and his associates. And it says, and they were filled with jealousy, and they lay hands on the apostles and put them in a public jail. So, chapter 4, last week you looked at a jail scene, and this week we look at another jail scene. What are the similarities between the two, and what are some of the differences between what we saw in chapter 4 and what we see in chapter 5? Okay, so there's one, right? So here we have this added element of the angel releasing them. They go out and they're speaking the message, and then the counselor goes, oh, wait, we got to go find these guys again and bring them back. So there's that element to it, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's more aggressive. Yeah, it's not just a finger-wagging, threatening. We moved to a more aggressive stance, and it seems to be the majority aggressive stance as well. Yeah, absolutely. And so as you look at this, and it was also, we've got all the apostles here, like we've gathered the whole lot of them. And so there's this, if you get down to verse 27 and 28, I think you see the gist of the problem. When they brought them, they stood them before the council. The high priest questioned them, saying, we gave you strict orders not to continue teaching in this name. So that references chapter 4, right? We already told you not to do this. And yet, you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching and intend to bring this man's blood upon us. They're saying more and more, the impact of Christianity as it grows is, we're the villains, right? This is not, okay, we've got the Sadducees and we have the Pharisees, and we don't like each other, but we can kind of get along in the same system. Christianity is not going to be a third party to that two-party system. It's there to annihilate that system. And they see it. And there is some jealousy there because, one, it's working, right? They're being held in high esteem. These guys can perform miracles and whatnot, signs and wonders, and they obviously can't. And two, there is some definite frustration that, hey, we're not the bad guys. Mm-hmm. Pilate did this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. And it's interesting in this chapter you have two circumstances of people trying to manipulate a system. Right? Ananias and Sapphira trying to manipulate a system. You have the chief priests, they're trying to manipulate the system. And as I said, it's coming out more and more. So the end result is the apostles do not back down. They have a level of commitment to preaching, as the angel would say, the whole message of life. And they're given advice by Gamaliel that, if these guys are not from God, then it'll all fizzle out. If they are from God, you do not want to be between them and their mission. And it's interesting. It's good advice, and it's an interesting detail that you can actually look in Acts 22, and Paul will say that was the guy who gives this advice. Gamaliel is the same guy that Paul trained at the feet of. So the one guy to kind of rise up with some sense to say, hey, if it's from God, you couldn't stop it. If it's not from God, you don't need to stop it. There has a connection there to who would later become the Apostle Paul. So we're at time. Thank you so much. Next week, Acts chapter 6.